The Block Island Wind Farm is considered a pilot project or a demonstration project, and I have a colleague who calls it a boutique wind farm, which I think is really great. The reason that the first wind farm was in Rhode Island waters was largely because it was a pet project of Governor Carcieri. They actually got their electricity by shipping diesel oil over to the island and running diesel generators, which was loud, smelly, pollution-causing, and actually provided not very high-quality electricity.
We were burning 1 million gallons of diesel fuel oil a year. In fact, I used to have a high-end turntable, and if the power wasn't cycling at a perfect rate, and it very often wasn't, you could hear that in the music.
I first heard about the offshore wind projects. It was the Block Island wind farms. I was told that because of the current power generation they had on the island, to get a better energy source to the island, they kind of advocated for the offshore wind farms.
The power comes in at a size that's way too big for the size of Block Island. One turbine alone, and there are 5, could power Block Island in the summertime. So what happens is the power comes in and it's like water coming through a big huge sewer pipe, but yet to get to your house, you only have a 1/2-inch water pipe. So there has to be a lot of equipment to take that down.
The technology, those are 6 megawatt machines, which means they're somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think, 600 feet above the surface of the water. It is a small development. It is very close to shore, okay? So it is 3 miles off the coast of the island. The newer, bigger projects are nowhere close to that. There's gonna be more turbines. The technology has changed, so now the new projects are using 10 and 12 megawatt machines, so they're much bigger. They're another 100, 200 feet taller, et cetera. So there are some differences that way. But where you can learn some things from the Block Island Wind Farm is about people's response to the technology, how they feel about it, what they think about offshore wind.
It has actually increased our tourism, and there are a lot of people that are coming out specifically to see the wind farm. The Block Island Ferry does tours in the summer once a week where they take people out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of worry on how it's going to affect the fishery.
It's not that many of us in the industry are against renewable energy. We're against renewable energy when it's actually potentially destroying the environment to supposedly make the environment better.
And so during the Obama administration, they had sort of restructured the Marine Mineral Service into the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And they started leasing areas for potential offshore wind development. And the places that were the focus of those initial leases were here in New England, off the coast of Massachusetts and Rhode Island. They're looking at places that are close to load, places where you can develop offshore wind that are close to a high level of demand. So some of these northeast cities certainly qualify that way. We have a lot of coastline, particularly in the East Coast. We have a lot of shallow areas with the continental shelf that provide a lot of potential areas for offshore wind development. So one of the things that made the Block Island wind farm really different from a lot of other things is that the governor actually hired the Coastal Resources Center at the University of Rhode Island to take the lead in a 2-year ocean planning process called the Ocean Special Area Management Plan, in which they brought together all kinds of different interests. Tourism, coastal management, a lot of fishing interests, shipping, etc., to talk about the areas where they could site this and what they would want to do. but a lot of the other lease areas have just sort of been drawn without a lot of input from people. So where you had some people who were interested in offshore wind, or people who were reluctant to accept offshore wind, and they were saying, well, okay, let's start small. We have these 5 turbines, and then there was a project which is now the South Fork Wind Farm. And they said, okay, so that seems like a reasonable way to scale up. We have these 5, we'll do 15, we'll see what happens. But what happened was that the floodgates opened, and suddenly there were lots and lots of projects in the pipeline, and the magnitude of what was going to happen really became clear to folks. There are a lot of unknowns around this, and certainly for people who make their livelihoods off of commercial fishing, I think, they have a right to be concerned about what's going to happen and seeing how things play out.
It's not our responsibility to find out what the effects are, and we don't feel that the companies that are doing the wind turbines are giving us enough information on the impacts on the environment.
Where they have focused a lot in terms of providing benefits to commercial fisheries is in this idea of mitigation. One of the difficulties when you talk about mitigation funds is how are you going to prove some form of loss, and how are those things going to be compensated? What sort of calculations do you use? And in some ways, this presupposes that there will be losses.
And everyone refers to the Block Island wind farm. There's a big difference between those 5 little ones that they have there with a totally different type of base that they have versus these, which are going to be 1,000+ feet tall, not including the actual blades of the turbine. There's no building in Boston that is taller than one single windmill that they're putting in out there.
All of the turbines that are being developed right now are using a single monopile that is pile driven into the sediments, and then you attach your tower to that.
The pile driving portion of the turbine installation has raised concerns after videos and information of the operation have been released. In areas near the installation site, sounds of pile driving can reach levels of 200 decibels within a mile of the installation. This can disrupt natural systems like the echolocation methods of large mammals and the migratory patterns of pelagic fish.
Remember, there's 10 years that they're going to be putting these things up. So 10 years of just pounding, right? 10 years of migratory fish, 10 years of the fry of everything that the migratory paths may just change.
Rhode Island, Maine, and Massachusetts fisheries are a crucial part of the New England economy. Massachusetts alone accounts for nearly 200,000 jobs. Combined, these states' fisheries generate nearly $3 billion in revenue each year. There is widespread belief that impacts to marine ecosystems resulting from offshore wind activity will have lasting adverse effects on New England's fishing industry.
The water, when it's coming around these turbines, which basically is about 40 feet around, the water has to catch up to itself when it goes around that turbine. Doing such a thing produces silt, which from a satellite view you can basically see lines of sediment being pushed off, which can undermine the wind turbines, but that can also will have greater environmental impacts on the fishery, clarity of our water, quality of our water, quality of our ocean. Right now they're dumping a ton of rock in these areas. Right now they're doing that because of sediment plumes. Once they dump the rock out in these areas, would cover more than the state of Rhode Island. The concerns with that, for one, is think about all the small ground fish, think about breeding grounds, think about all the things that they're just going and crushing and destroying just by dropping this rock everywhere.
There's a lot of concerns about effects to marine life, particularly whales. So there's lots of requirements and limits and et cetera around how and when these things can be developed. Now, there's always pressure, right, on individuals and on companies to do things faster, cheaper, etc. So, having some level of oversight is great. And again, we need to monitor and see how things go and make adjustments as we have problems in what's happening.
It's not our responsibility to find out what the effects are, and we don't feel that the companies that are doing the wind turbines are giving us enough information on the impacts on the environment. So we're concerned about that. We feel that they haven't done their due diligence to say, hey, this isn't going to have an impact, or these are the impacts.
The success of the Black Island Wind Farm, from the consulting of multiple communities and industries to the exclusion of marine protected areas, set an ideal model for all future wind projects to follow. But with the exponential explosion of these projects and pressure to employ green energy, there are doubts as to whether the framework Black Island created will be followed. When the full-scale deployment of offshore energy stretches along the East Coast, it will generate 30 gigawatts of renewable energy to 10 million homes. Research collected by Ørsted, one of the largest developers of offshore wind, has determined that the carbon saved during the lifespan of a wind turbine is 50 times more than the carbon produced during its manufacturing, transport, and decommissioning.
Block Island was, for the most part, very supportive, especially the year-round community of the wind farm. I think people were very proud to have it as a demonstration project.
Industrializing the ocean with these things, so a variety of negative impacts can come from that.
And so my personal opinion is that a lot of what has been driving the market is this desire for economic development, creating jobs, creating ports redevelopment, etc.
I have no problem putting my name to this. There's only one of two reasons that this is going in. Someone was paid off, someone's making money, or someone is just ignorant to what this possibly is going to do. Because their due diligence on what the impacts are going to be have not been done. We cannot get those answers.